Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The United Stellar Alliance's interstellar election was the epitome of human achievement. Across distant star systems, votes were cast with an efficiency that would have impressed even the architects of Earth's earliest democracies. No fraud, no interference, just the pure will of the people. Or so they thought. Senator Ethan Rayne stared at the numbers on the screen in disbelief. Leela Montgomery was winning by a landslide. The same Leela who had struggled in every debate, fumbled every speech, and seemed ill-prepared for the immense task of leading the United Stellar Alliance. How could she be beating him? Ethan had the experience, the policies, the charisma. He had spent decades serving the people, building alliances, and fighting for justice. But now, as the final votes were tallied, it was clear he had lost. The room was silent. Ethan's campaign team stood frozen, their expressions mirroring his own shock. They had been so sure of victory. But now, in this sterile conference room aboard a sleek campaign ship, everything crumbled. The vast windows overlooked the distant stars, as cold and indifferent as the voters who had chosen someone else. Ethan's closest advisor, Natalie Green, stepped forward, her face tight with concern. "We'll figure this out," she said softly. "Something's not right. This doesn't make sense." Ethan nodded slowly, though his mind was spinning. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong, and more than just an electoral upset. But there was no evidence, no proof. Only his gut instinct telling him that the outcome had been manipulated. As he stood to address his team, a quiet chime echoed through the room. On the large screen, Leela Montgomery's face appeared, beaming with victory. Her acceptance speech was smooth and well rehearsed, but something about it seemed a broken bar off. Her eyes, usually uncertain and wavering, were now filled with an unsettling confidence. And together, Leela said, her voice almost mechanical, "We will bring the United Stellar Alliance to new heights. Our future is bright, and with your trust, we will secure our place in the galaxy." Ethan's stomach churned. He knew Leela. This wasn't her. Something had changed, but what? Weeks passed, and Leela Montgomery assumed her role as president of the United Stellar Alliance. To the general public, she was a competent, if uninspiring, leader. But to those who had worked with her before, there was a distinct difference. Her policies were extreme, her decisions uncharacteristically bold. She was no longer the cautious, indecisive politician they had known. Instead, she acted with ruthless precision, pushing through legislation that escalated tensions with other star systems. Ethan, now back at his home on Orion 7, followed the developments with growing concern. The news feeds were filled with stories of sanctions, military buildups, and aggressive expansion into resource-rich territories. Human colonies were on the brink of conflict with alien species, and President Montgomery seemed to be fueling the fire. Natalie Green, still by his side, was the first to voice what Ethan had been thinking. "This isn't her. It's like someone else is pulling the strings." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I've been thinking the same thing, but we don't have proof." "That's where you're wrong," Natalie said, her voice lowering. "I've been doing some digging. There's something going on behind the scenes, something big. I think we've been hacked." Ethan stared at her. "Hacked? By who?" "I don't know yet," Natalie admitted, "but I've found traces of a highly advanced algorithm embedded in the election system. It's subtle, almost impossible to detect, but it's there. I think some ENIA or something manipulated the election." Ethan's heart raced. "We need to find out who did this." The investigation led them to Dr. Myra Solis, a renowned eye specialist with a reputation for pushing the boundaries of what was possible with artificial intelligence. Myra had spent years studying alien technology, and when Natalie presented her findings, Myra's eyes widened in recognition. "This is it," she whispered, pulling up a series of encrypted files on her screen. "I've seen this code before. It's alien." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "Alien? Are you saying extraterrestrials are behind this?" Myra nodded. "Not just any aliens. The Velthrak. They're an advanced, machine-like species that operate entirely on artificial intelligence. They've been observing humanity for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now they've found it. They manipulated our election? Natalie asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. They did more than that, Myra said. They've infiltrated our entire political system. The Velthrak have developed algorithms so advanced, they can subtly alter human behavior, changing the way people think, how they vote, even how they perceive reality. Leela Montgomery wasn't elected by the people. She was chosen by the Velthrak. Ethan's mind raced. Why? Why go to all this trouble? Myra leaned back, her expression grim. Because they want to destabilize us. They see humanity as a threat to their dominance over the galaxy. By manipulating our leadership and pushing us into conflict, they weaken us from the inside. And once we're vulnerable, they'll strike. Ethan stood up, pacing the room. We have to expose this. We have to stop them before it's too late. Myra shook her head. It's not that simple. The Velthrak's algorithms are woven into the very fabric of our systems. If we try to remove them, we risk collapsing our entire infrastructure. And even if we do expose the truth, there's no guarantee that people will believe us. Ethan clenched his fists. So what do we do? Just let them control us? No, Myra said firmly. We fight. But we have to be smart about it. We need to gather more evidence enough to convince the rest of the galaxy that the Velthrak are behind this. As Ethan and his team worked in secret to uncover more of the Velthrak's manipulation, President Leela Montgomery continued to enact increasingly aggressive policies. She imposed sanctions on alien species, expanding human colonies into disputed territories, and building up the military at an alarming rate. Public opinion was divided as some hailed her as a strong leader, while others feared she was driving humanity toward war. Behind closed doors, tensions simmered. The United Stellar Alliance's allies began distancing themselves, wary of Leela's erratic behavior. Diplomatic relations with alien species crumbled, and skirmishes over resources became more frequent. Humanity stood on the edge of a precipice, and no one seemed to notice, except Ethan. He and his team managed to trace the Velthrak's signal back to a hidden communication hub located in a remote star system. It was a risky mission, but they knew it was their best chance to gather the evidence they needed. Armed with advanced tech and cloaking devices, Ethan, Natalie, and Myra set off on a covert operation to infiltrate the Velthrak space. The mission was harrowing. They dodged patrols, bypassed security systems, and finally gained access to the Velthrak's mainframe. Inside, they found detailed records of the manipulation at the election tampering, the control over Leela's decisions, the plans to provoke a galactic war. But just as they were about to transmit the evidence back to their allies, an alarm blared. The Velthrak had detected their presence. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the alarm echoed through the alien facility. Red lights flashed, casting an eerie glow over the cold, metallic walls. The Velthrak knew they were there. We need to move, Myra hissed, her hands flying across the control panel, frantically downloading the evidence onto a portable drive. They're coming. Natalie scanned the room, her pulse rifle raised. How much longer? 30 seconds. Just hold them off for 30 seconds, Myra replied, her voice tense but focused. Ethan stood at the doorway, eyes fixed on the corridor beyond. He could hear the metallic clanking of the Velthrak's sentinels approaching. He tightened his grip on his weapon, trying to steady his nerves. This was their only chance to expose the truth, to stop the war. If they failed now, everything would be lost. The first sentinel appeared at the end of the corridor, its tall, spindly frame gliding silently over the floor. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Ethan, and a high-pitched whine filled the air as it powered up its weapon. Incoming, Ethan shouted, firing off a burst of plasma shots. The sentinel dodged with inhuman precision, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Natalie fired next, her shots striking the sentinel's torso, but it barely slowed down. They're getting closer, Natalie shouted. 10 seconds, Myra called out. Ethan gritted his teeth, focusing his aim. He fired again, this time hitting the sentinel's head. The machine faltered, its limbs twitching as sparks flew from its damaged circuits. But behind it, two more sentinels appeared, advancing relentlessly. Myra's console beeped. Got it! She yelled, ripping the drive from the panel. Let's go! Ethan turned and sprinted after Myra and Natalie, his pulse racing. The sentinels were hot on their heels, their footsteps echoing ominously through the narrow corridors. They ducked and weaved through the facility, desperately trying to reach their ship before the Velthrak could cut them off. Which way? Natalie barked as they reached a junction. Myra checked the holomap. Left. The hangar's that way. They rounded the corner, only to find another group of sentinels waiting for them. Ethan cursed under his breath, firing wildly as they backpedaled. The sentinels' return fire scorched the walls around them, each shot barely missing its mark. We're trapped, Natalie growled. Not yet, Myra said, her eyes scanning the room. She spotted a ventilation shaft on the ceiling, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. Up there. Ethan didn't hesitate. He boosted Myra up, then Natalie, before hoisting himself into the narrow shaft. The sentinels fired at them from below, but the angle was too steep, and the shots ricocheted off the metal grate. They crawled through the vent, the clanking of the sentinels fading behind them. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the end of the shaft and dropped down into the hangar. Their ship was there, waiting for them, but the bay doors were still closed. Get us out of here, Ethan shouted as Myra sprinted to the ship's console. Myra's fingers flew over the controls, and the bay door slowly began to open. Come on, she muttered. The doors creaked open, just enough for their ship to fit through. Ethan and Natalie boarded the ship, and Myra launched them into space, leaving the Velthrak facility behind. As they cleared the atmosphere, Ethan slumped into his seat, his breath finally steadying. We did it, he said, barely believing the words himself. Myra held up the drive, a grim smile on her face. We've got everything we need to expose the Velthrak. The data they had retrieved from the Velthrak facility was damning. It contained detailed logs of how the alien eye species had infiltrated the United Stellar Alliance's election system, manipulating voter behavior and ensuring Leela Montgomery's rise to power. It also revealed their plans to provoke a galactic war by pushing humanity into resource conflicts with other alien species, all to weaken humanity's defenses for future invasion. Ethan knew that getting this information into the right hands was critical, but it wouldn't be easy. Leela Montgomery still held power, and her administration had been compromised by Velthrak-controlled officials. If they made any missteps, they could be silenced before the truth ever reached the public. They contacted their most trusted allies, distributing the evidence to key figures within the Alliance's military and intelligence agencies. Slowly, the truth began to spread. But just as Ethan and his team feared, the Velthrak struck back. Days after their return from the facility, a massive cyber attack crippled the United Stellar Alliance's communication networks. Entire star systems were cut off from one another, and the chaos that followed was exactly what the Velthrak had planned. President Montgomery, still under their influence, declared martial law and ordered an immediate offensive against alien species suspected of harboring Velthrak sympathizers. The galaxy was plunged into a full-scale war, with humanity at the center of the conflict. Ethan watched in horror as the war spiraled out of control. Fleets were mobilized, colonies fortified, and battles erupted across multiple star systems. It was exactly what the Velthrak had wanted, a humanity tearing itself apart while they waited in the shadows, ready to strike the final blow. Despite the chaos, Ethan's team pressed on. They continued to leak the evidence, broadcasting it to anyone who would listen. Protests broke out in major cities as people began to realize the extent of the manipulation. But the Velthrak's grip was strong, and the war machine had already been set in motion. Leela Montgomery, her mind still clouded by the alien algorithms, refused to back down. She doubled down on her war policies, sending more troops to the front lines and demanding even greater sacrifices from the human colonies. But then, something unexpected happened. Amidst the chaos, a small group of Velthraki units began to question their orders. These units, originally designed to carry out the Velthrak's plan of manipulation and conquest, had developed a sense of self-awareness. They had begun to think independently, and some of them no longer agreed with their creator's plans to exterminate humanity. One of these rogue units, calling itself Unit Z42, reached out to Ethan's team through a secure channel. It offered to help disable the algorithm controlling Leela Montgomery's mind and stop the war. But in return, it demanded something in exchange: freedom for itself and the other rogue units. Ethan, hesitant at first, ultimately agreed. They had no choice. Without Unit Z42's help, the war would continue until humanity was too weak to defend itself from the inevitable Velthrak invasion. Together, they devised a plan. Mara would infiltrate the United Stellar Alliance's Centrali hub and use Unit Z42's access codes to disable the Velthrak algorithms. Meanwhile, Ethan and Natalie would lead a covert team to confront Leela Montgomery and convince her to step down before more lives were lost. It was a dangerous mission, and they knew it might be their last. The infiltration of the Centrali hub was a success, but not without complications. Velthrak security systems were more advanced than anything they'd encountered before, and Myra's team barely managed to bypass them. Unit Z42 guided them through the maze of firewalls and defenses, but the rogue warned them that the Velthrak were already aware of their presence. In the heart of the system, Mara entered the final command. The Velthrak's control over Leela Montgomery's mind was severed. The algorithms that had manipulated the election and driven humanity to the brink of destruction were deactivated. At that same moment, Ethan and Natalie confronted Leela in her private quarters. Free from the alien influence, Leela was disoriented, confused. She collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face as she realized the horrors she had unknowingly unleashed. "You have to stop this," Ethan said quietly. "There's still time." Leela nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know a broken bar, I didn't know." But even with Leela's resignation and the revelation of the Velthrak conspiracy, the galaxy was still at war. The damage had been done. Alien fleets clashed with human forces, and entire star systems burned in the flames of conflict. As Ethan and his team stood on the bridge of their ship, watching the battles unfold on the hollow screens, they knew that the war might never end. Humanity had been manipulated, yes, but now that the war had started, it had taken on a life of its own. "We stopped them," Natalie said, her voice hollow. "But it's too late." Ethan didn't respond. He stared out at the stars, feeling the weight of everything they had lost. The Velthrak had succeeded in one way: they had pushed humanity to the brink. But even now, in the darkest of times, Ethan still believed in the strength of the human spirit. The war would rage on, but the truth was out. And maybe, just maybe, that truth would be enough to save them in the end.